Those of you who don't know me well and can't see me, I'm a good-looking version of Jeff. Speaking of Jeff, this is what it feels like when you include everybody in a Milbasin Simcha. So, where's Elkie? Is Elkie here?
Oh no.
Oh, she's hiding. All right, I'll make more jokes about that later. But it's really a very special pleasure to be here to speak at this really amazing occasion. It was a pleasure to have Dr. Sonnenschein by our house for Shabbos. And it's also really nice, for once, not to be the only immigrant in the room. And to actually be able to, identify and have people identify where you came from and what it means to grow up, starting as a foreigner and then, actually having to, come to America and make it and make friends. And when I was speaking about what with Ronan about a week and a half ago, when he came up to me and asked me to speak tonight, so I was very honored. I felt very privileged. I didn't realize at the time that all of Woodmere would be speaking. So I felt great, and I told Dina as we were walking home that night after the uproar, after we dropped off Jack and Jeff at the Stern House. Jack had just finished telling us about how they used to, lock people in their room with pythons. True story. So we leave Jeff and the Sterns, and we're walking home. And I tell Dina just casually, Ronan asked me to speak at the Sheva Brachos. So we're literally walking down the street. She stops cold in her tracks. She looks at me and says, "Listen to me. Howie's the only guy in shul that actually likes you. You better be articulate." So I'm thinking to myself, I'm obviously naturally a little bit offended. So I tell her, I'm that's really offensive. So she's like, "What? No, I'm sure other people like you." I'm like, "No, I don't care about that. The fact that you think I'm not articulate," I think I'm articulate. And as the few days went by, and I'm thinking about what to say, I couldn't help but notice that this simcha really corresponds amazingly with the parsha that we're going to be reading this week. And a lot of people spoke about this already, so I'm sorry if I'm being repetitive, but I want to give you a little bit of an outsider, if you will, perspective, because obviously, as I mentioned, I didn't grow up in Milbasin, and we know the famous pasuk that starts this week's parsha. That the Torah says, "Re'eh anochi noten lifnechem hayom baracho kola." That see, today I am placing before you blessing and the opposite of blessing. And there's so much Torah just in those few words to unpack. And as I was, thinking about what to say, it really seemed to me that at almost every single step, every single word, and every single interpretation that Chazal tell us is a very powerful message that applies to Hershkovich family, and I'm sure to the Sonnenschein family. Obviously, I'm coming from the perspective of Howie's friend and Chavrusa, and I just wanted to take a couple of minutes to go through that. So, the first word, re'eh, so we know that re'eh means to see, and there's different connotations of what it means to see. But a beautiful pshat that I heard once from a friend that he brings down in the name of a number of Hasidic Svarim is that re'eh doesn't just mean to look in front of you. Re'eh means that you have to have an expansive view of the world. You have to be able to look around and see all Hashem has created and all that Hashem has put into this earth, into this creation, for us to enjoy in order to be able to come close to Hashem. And that's something that I learned from Howie a while ago, not necessarily in the most positive way. I'll tell you the story. So, there's certain things that we all appreciate, and there's certain things that most of us wouldn't think to appreciate. So we've been on a couple of trips, myself and Howie, and the Eish Kodesh trips and other trips, which I'll tell you a little bit about. So the first trip that we went on, we happened to be roommates. This was a Hungary trip. When we got to Israel, we were roommates in Israel, but it was a big room. It was a bunch of us. And, I was in one room with what we'll call the bubble boy, because he wasn't allowed to be exposed to anything, that was infectious. different story by itself. And Howie was rooming, I think, with Jeff in a different part of the the big apartment. And it was a Friday afternoon. I'll never forget that I came into a room, and all of a sudden I hear like crazy loud, excited screaming. And for a second I was scared, and then I run into a room. I thought maybe there was a fire, somebody was hurt. And I run in, and I see Ronen, Howie, Jeff, and Gene all piled up on top of each other in a bed. True story. So Gene wasn't on the trip, and he had just surprised them. And apparently in Mill Basin, it's very normal for guys when they're happy to pile up on top of each other in a bed. And I figured out it's just like a moment of excitement that's gonna go away. And they just stayed there for like immeasurable amount of time. And I slowly backed out of the room, like Homer Simpson, and into the bush. And obviously, it kind of stayed in my memory. Fast forward a couple of years later, and we're going on the Italy trip, and I guess a couple of guys weren't coming, so Howie didn't have a choice. So he asked me if I'm in a room with him. So first first thing that comes back to me is that memory from the apartment. I'm like, no. Like, there's no way I'm going to be in a room alone with you. And he kept insisting, and he made me feel guilty. Howie has a very special power of making people feel guilty when they say no. And eventually I'm like, fine, I'll do it. So we're in the room. This is after being sleep deprived, running around Italy for the people that were on the trip, going from place to place, looking for graves that didn't exist. And eventually we get into a room, we're sleeping, it's like 1:30, and all of a sudden, I hear the sound of animals. Okay? I think to myself I'm dreaming, but then I open my eyes, and Howie's sitting there on his phone, in his boxers, at 1:30 in the morning, watching the National Geography channel with animals fighting each other and eating each other. Do you guys know about this? So apparently Howie, the way he falls asleep or he wakes up and he can't go back to sleep, is he likes to watch animal shows. And
what's
so
wrong
first,
with that?
what?
What's wrong with that?
So there's nothing wrong with it if you have earphones or AirPods and the guy that's sleeping next to you can't hear it. And apparently Martha has been tolerating this for years without ever saying anything. But you could have told me before the trip. So this is going on, for night after night. Finally I couldn't take it anymore. I took his phone, I think I threw it out the window. And he made me pay for it. And it was annoying, but the thing that I learned is that, how he told me he has an appreciation for things that most people don't think about. He likes animals. For some reason, I'm sure there's some deep psychological traumatic reason of why this helps him. And it's that power of Re'eh, that power of being able to see that everything that Hashem creates in this world is there for a purpose, and it's there to help us in some way to connect to Hashem. The second thing is the word Anochi. So it says, Re'eh, Anochi, noten lifnechem hayom, that I put in front of you I, the word Anochi. So there's a lot of deep meaning behind the word Anochi. And Rav Asher Weiss brings from a lot of the Hasidic Sfarim that Anochi, this is one of the places that we see in the Torah where Hashem is telling us that we have to realize our self-worth. We have to realize what Anochi means in each and every single one of us. We have to have self-respect, and we have to care about ourselves. We really have to care about ourselves. And caring about himself is something that Howie really, really, really excels in, to the exclusion of everybody else. And I've seen this many times, but one of the times that I really came across very, very prominently is when we were in Israel for Akiva's bar mitzvah. And the Hershkoviches, came along, and Howie decided to, plan this trip where we're going to go to this really nice hotel called the Genesis, which, he didn't tell me how much it cost. So I went along with it. And I have very bad luck with cars in Israel. So we're driving to Genesis, and we get there. And I'm literally, what? Bereshit, sorry, it's called Bereshit, but it's called Bereshit, but it said, no, when I booked it, it said Genesis. Whatever. So we get to Bereshit, and I'm about to make the left, and one of the kids decides to throw corn chips all over me, and I go to pick it up, and as I'm doing that, I rear end like the biggest Israeli guy, biggest, boldest, baddest Israeli guy that you've ever seen. So I'm like freaking out. This guy comes out, he's like yelling at me, he's like screaming at me, he's like, oh, matose! And like, I don't know what to do. And all of a sudden from the corner of my eye, I see Howie's car approaching because we had kind of left together. So he pulls up next to me. I'm like, all right, thank God. Howie speaks, better Hebrew than I do, and he's gonna, stop and help me. He pulls up next to me, opens his window, looks at it and says, you hit the guy in front of you. And he drives away, and as they're driving away into the hotel, Martha yells out, give him $500, he'll leave you alone. I'm like, did that just happen? So I found out later that this is like a couple of months after Moishy had gotten his license. So apparently car accidents were like an everyday occurrence in their house. So sorry about that, Moishy. I had to at least put one of those in there. So I walk in, finally like 2 hours later after everything that happens. I walk in and Howie, like the story that Jeff was telling before, he's just like laying there by the pool as if like nothing happened. I'm like, I come in like I'm all sweaty. And for one of the first times I really understood how Howie, excels in this meetup caring about himself. That doesn't matter that my good friend, my chavrusa, just got into a car wreck. I have to go sit by the pool and he'll figure it out. So I kept that memory also. And fast forward, again to one of the trips that we had. And Howie and I are about to, all of us are waiting to get onto the plane. And when you go through security, they make you put all your belongings into the thing that goes through. Of course, I always get stopped because my passport says born in Iran. So I'm always the last guy to go through. And for some reason, Howie was behind me, and he puts everything through. And I see his passport come through the metal detector. So, as an immigrant from Iran, you know that the last thing that you want to do is lose your passport. Like you could lose anything else. You gotta like keep your passport the whole time. So I thought to myself, you know what would be a funny payback for this jerk just driving right by me and not stopping, and all the other stuff that he's pulled over, like the 2 years. I only knew him for like 2 years at this point. That I know him. I feel bad for you guys. I know him for like 20. So I'm like, I'm gonna take his passport. So I took his passport. I hid it. And, he came and starts looking around and he couldn't find it. And one of the things that was amazing, and this is actually like kind of a nice thing, so I hate to say it, is that it says the word hayom. And hayom, there's a lot of mefarshim that say what hayom means, but hayom, this is what Jeff was talking about. Hayom is that, anochi noten lifnechem hayom beracha. That they explain that hayom, that every single day is a bracha. That every single day is a bracha that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is giving us. To always to try to maintain that positive outlook in life. And it was amazing to me that despite the fact that obviously he didn't know that this was a joke, that he thought that he wasn't going to be able to go on the trip, that he had lost his passport, he never lost his cool. He was actually, and maybe internally I could tell that he was, he was really losing it. But the whole time he had that dumb grin that he always has on his face. And never left until my wife is shaking her head against it. So until Ronan, of course, the nice guy that he is, couldn't take it anymore, and he went and he told him that Rabin has it. I give back the passport. And as we've gone through, these are obviously funny stories that happen, but the truth of the matter is that all those words also have very different connotation that you guys really have taught me and Dina, and have really taught all of us as a community. Re'eh means to see, but it also means to have a vision. It means to have a vision to see what could be, not just what's in front of you. And Howie, as a business person, as a husband, as a father, as a president of the shul, and as a chavrusa, one of the things that's always really amazed me about him is the fact that he has a vision of what could be. When we're in one of the same trips, I decided for whatever reason that I was going to start to learn on Shabbos. I was going to do one daf a week on Shabbos. And Howie's like, you know what, I'm going to do it with you. It's a long story without getting into the whole thing. He's like, I'm going to do it with you. And a couple of months later, he says, you know what, I'm also going to start doing daf yomi. And of course, I couldn't bear the thought of him actually beating me in something. So I said to myself, you know what, if he's going to do daf yomi, I'm going to do daf yomi also. That was almost 5 years ago. And since then, because of Howie's vision, the two of us have done 24 Masechtas together. Wow. We're now, I think, doing 25 and 26. Some doing the week and some on Shabbos. And that was Re'eh. That was being able to have the vision of seeing what you could accomplish. And the Anochi, even though I joke about Anochi being, about himself, Chazal tell us that Anochi is also the connotation of Anochi Hashem, the first of the Aseret HaDibros, of realizing of what Anochi comes from, is that Hashem wants us to emulate Him. That Hashem is telling us that when you do something, you should realize that you're doing it because I am the one that gave you all this blessing. And we know that that's something that we've all noticed and that you guys talked about, that Jeff talked about, everybody else talked about. Everything that the Hershkoviches do, Howie, Martha, and something that I'm sure is going to get passed down to Moishy and I'm going to butcher your name.
Blimi.
Sorry. So Moishy and Blimi, I'm sure, is the fact that everything goes back to the Anochi of Hashem. The Anochi of ourselves, of what we have to offer, is all because we're trying to emulate the Anochi of Hashem. Which finally brings us to the Hayom. The Hayom of the Hershkoviches. If you look at the end of the Parsha, it talks about Simcha. And I heard a beautiful word from Rav Salveshik today, that if you look in the Torah, whenever it talks about Simcha, many times, almost always, it says, V'samachta lifnei Hashem. Because at the end of the day, when you take all these messages, the message of having a vision, the message of realizing the Anochi of yourselves, of your self-worth and being an agent of Hashem, and also the positivity of Hayom, is to lead to that Simcha. The only way you could do it is to realize that everything that you're doing is Lifnei Hashem. Everything you're doing is for the sake of Hashem, is to make Hashem's name greater in this world, to make your community better, to do better things and bigger things for your friends. That's a lesson that I really have learned. The Simchas Chaim, his name is Chaim, the Simchas Chaim, I'm not always the most positive and optimistic guy, but one of the things that I've really learned to emulate from Howie and Martha and the family is to try to always have that Simchas Chaim of realizing Lifnei Hashem. It's the smile that you've passed on to Moishy. It's the smile that I'm sure you guys are going to pass on to your grandchildren. And for that, I and all of us are very, very thankful. And we wish you all the best and have no doubt that that's going to be a Simchas HaChaim that's going to permeate all of Klal Yisrael for many years to come. Mazel Tov, we're so happy for you.
Amen.